Batu, Barada, Nikto.
You must remember those words.
Gordon's alive.
You know what the Turing test is?
I know Kung Fu.
Dead or alive, you are coming with me.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Stories Out of Time and Space. I'm your regular host, Scott Weatherly, and as always, I'm joined by Julian Darius. Julian, how are you doing? You okay?
Well, I just took my suicide pill, and I've got exactly the duration of one podcast left. So,
Yeah, that's handed to you by the Salvation Army, or your government issue, I should say, suicide pill. Yes. Yeah, we are jumping into, in a solemn and nihilistic kind of way, our post-apocalyptic season. We've done all the craziness, the
Mad
revs,
Max.
yeah, the revs, metal, and witness our Mad Max saga that we've done. We're now jumping back to 1959. We've done this as you'll see that we've done this as a double header. Here on the main feed, we are doing a film called On the Beach, starring Gregory Peck, Ava Gardner, Fred Astaire, and Anthony Perkins. But on our Patreon, we're doing another sort of 1959 post-apocalyptic film, another sort of nuclear disaster film called The World, the Flesh, and the Devil, that starred Harry Belafonte. So go check that out on our Patreon feed. It's a very different kind of film, but still very much worth talking about. But yeah, you'll get notes on that. Go check it out. Anyway, today we are.
Well, and at
indeed...
this point, there weren't that many post-apocalyptic movies. I mean, we're talking 1959. This is still a really new genre.
Oh, definitely. And we should highlight both of them talking about both the fears and regrets of nuclear war and the creation of nuclear capabilities. Yes, because this one we are talking about On the Beach, 1959, give the cruise to. After a global nuclear war, the residents of Australia must come to terms with the fact that all life will be destroyed in a matter of months. And this does, the film has a number of people, basically sort of a lot of the surviving military forces from the war have sort of moved, especially the US Submarine Corps, have moved to Australia, and they've sort of joined the Australian Navy, and they then receive a basically a Morse code message, but it's a bit of a mess, and
From San Diego.
Sorry, and the USS Swordfish, Sawfish, thank you, is sent to investigate a submarine, captained by Gregory Peck, accompanied by Lieutenant Peter Holmes, Anthony Perkins. And when they reach there, they find out the truth of the rest of the world and their fate as well. We'll get into that. So, Julian, what were your first initial thoughts then on the Beach?
Well, the movie starts with a subsurfacing, and it's not clear what the situation is. And it's a little slow to roll out. I mean, it's 1959. Information is not given to you in a feed at the start. It sort of dribbles out. The first Mad Max kind of does this too. But this is 59 and the pacing is a little slow. It's black and white. I mean, I didn't know how much I was going to like this. I think this is a masterpiece. I think I am going to list this along with The Day the Earth Stood Still and Forbidden Planet as sort of my three favorite 1950s sci-fi movies, or the three great 1950s sci-fi movies. And of them, this is totally forgotten, except in the history of post-apocalyptic movies.
Yeah, and it's also, we should say, it's based on a novel as well.
Which they changed a bit.
They changed bits and pieces to the extent, though, although it's one of those interesting things, they didn't change that much. However, the writer was still so annoyed by the changes that were made that he disconnected himself a little bit from the final movie. Um, but no, I agree. This film was an interesting one where it takes a while to get going.
Mhm.
This is not a pacey um actioner. Like you're not going to be getting all kinds of different things. Like it's introducing you to characters and relationships and people that what's interesting about this film as well that I want to sort of throw out that starts from the beginning and goes throughout, or you learn more of, is the fact that this film is about people and how they deal with trauma. And this idea of confronting it in different ways. And we'll meet this series of characters that like they have to process information and they've got certain responsibilities or they have regrets, and it's how they are processing it in different ways. And it hangs over this film throughout. Like different characters keep doing different things. Um, Anthony Perkins, Peter Holmes or Lieutenant Holmes is just like,
Mhm.
well, the thing I can do is I can be pragmatic and I can be practical and I can continue to do my duty. That's what I can do. Um, he's that kind of character, and he's contrasted with like Gregory Peck as this Captain um Dwight Lionel or Commander Dwight Lionel, and who's a bit more like the American sort of like, he's square jawed and all that kind of usual stuff. But as you keep getting introduced to these characters, you sort of realize that a lot of this is hiding stuff. And then Fred Astaire's character Julian Olson, you find out he's actually responsible because he was involved in the creation of the bombs, and he's got like all this guilt about what happened. And he has we'll get to it. There's a great monologue that he has later on when someone asks him who started the war, and
Mhm.
they talk about that. And then Mary Holmes, Peter's wife, who just never wants to talk about this stuff, just does not
Mhm.
want to confront it ever, and gets angry when anyone ever like talks about the war or what's happening in the world now. And so that was the thing I loved about this film was although it's slow, it keeps trying to show you how people are trying to deal with this um, impending disaster that's going to wipe out humanity, but also like their own emotions. To the extent that there's a oh well, shut up in a minute. There's a couple of characters that what are the two characters in this in the Muppets called that sit in the balcony? What's it in Waldorf, isn't it? It's
Oh, yeah, I don't remember.
do you know who I mean there? There's
Yeah,
like the
yeah.
two grumpy old men. There's a scene with like similar characters in this about two people tasting
Hmm.
port and wine, and they know that the end's coming. The end of the world is coming, and they're like, "Well, but there's still 400 bottles of this port to be drank." Bad planning, in my point of view, and they sort of talk about how it's somebody else's fault that they've got these 400 bottles of wine to drink, and they've only got several months to do it. Like there's just bits like that I was like, in face value, I'm like, this feels weird. But then as the film progresses, you're like, oh shit, like all these people are facing into the inevitable and they are trying to blanket it or drown it out or do something to try and forget, or I don't know. It's just brilliantly done of how these people are having to confronted daily with this thing. And the other thing I want to say is that obviously Mary is pregnant as well. So there's this thing. Oh, so they just had a child. Sorry. So there's this
Hmm.
whole. So we won't get to it. But yeah, it's just a brilliant film in that thing that of just how it keeps sort of putting you in front of these people and how each of them is dealing with it differently.
Well, one thing that didn't occur to me until now is that really this is a disaster movie. I
Mm.
mean, because disaster movies have ensemble casts, and you sort of watch how different sets of characters go through it and who
Mm.
survives and who doesn't, right? That's kind of how to. But this is sort of. I mean, I guess some of those alien invasion movies of the '50s were disaster movies too,
Yeah.
but we covered one or two, but I hadn't thought about that. But structurally, it's a disaster movie. The thing we should say, before we get any deeper, is that basically there's been a nuclear exchange, and it's believed nobody has survived in the
Mm.
northern hemisphere, and there's no signal except for they later say this signal out of San Diego. Um, and later there's a theory that the radiation might be dissipating faster than expected, in the extreme north. So there's some cause for hope. But basically, there is no United States anymore.
Nope. Or Europe.
Or Europe. I mean, I guess that's worth including. But I mean, the map of the world is the United States, okay, and everything else. So there's no United States. The whole world is gone except for Australia and presumably like New Zealand and Antarctica. But the radioactive clouds are drifting south.
Yes.
And so that's why they have like a month until it hits them, and basically everyone dies. So that's sort of the setup, which is pretty shocking and morbid, especially for 1959, and as such a star-studded cast. So, like you, I also loved these characters. And you're right that they sort of all take a different approach. Gregory Peck as Commander Towers is sort of falls in love with Ava Gardner, who is, an Australian. I do also love that the United States Navy, or the surviving ship or two, has been integrated into the Australian military.
Yeah.
Like, this is the last survivors, that's pretty remarkable. But so Towers is in love with this Australian woman, but can't express it because he has a wife and kid in the United States who he speaks of in the present tense, even though he knows rationally that they're dead.
And he names Moira incorrectly. He refers to it with his wife's name at one occasion.
Yeah, and she says, "I'm okay with that," but really he's struggling with, PTSD. He's struggling with this trauma, and there's a really brilliant conversation where he talks about being away at sea and thinking, I knew something could happen to me, but I always thought, my wife and kid would be okay, right? They'd be able to go on without me. It never occurred to me that something would happen to them. And this sense of loss is very deep. So I think, that's a kind of fascinating story. How do you go on in the wake of a tragedy like that? And then at the end, how does he balance love with his duty to his crew? And how do you understand that? So that's a fascinating story. Fred Astaire as Julian is, like you said, sort of racked with guilt, but he retreats into fun. He retreats into buying a Formula One racer. And, Moira says, you're trying to kill yourself. And he says, like, basically, so what if I am? So that's interesting. I do like, their names were Statler and Waldorf. These commanders talking about the wine and retreating into fun in their own sort of sense. And why not, right? And you sort of see like the vestiges of civilization playing out, and this, there's this wonderful trope with the painting that goes askew as the door is closed, and the waiter keeps putting it back, and you think, what does money matter, right? How much is a bottle of wine? There's a shortage, but this place has lots of bottles of wine. How much does a bottle of wine cost? What's the point of still being a waiter? How do you? I guess you have nothing else to do, right? But I mean,
well, it goes back to that
life order or meaning.
Yes, I think that's the thing. Is a part of this film for me, other than the disappointment of this is Australia and they're not all sort of wearing leather and riding around in beach buggies, killing each other. So
basically, all this entire season is going to be you saying it's not Mad Max.
Yeah. However, we do get an insane racing scene at the end of this film.
That's true.
So I was fully satisfied by that. So
you get your little piece of, Miller.
But the thing is, as you said about this order, if you're not, I think there's this thing of like, if you're not doing something, you would just go insane. Yes, I know that we have a month or so to go, but everyone just keeps doing what they do because but what else do you do? Like, if you're not doing something, like, I'd imagine you sort of go insane. It would just, you need that distraction regardless of the inevitable. And I think that's sort of like what a lot of them do. And that waiter in particular, I love the fact he's like a secondary character. He's not even a secondary character. He is like a tertiary character. Like, he's there. He interacts with some of the main cast, and he sort of serves port and whatever. But there's a montage at the end, and which we'll get to, of sort of like when the inevitable is coming about, and you see him, and he's drinking some of the port, and the lights are going out, and he just sort of plays a final sort of like moment of snooker or whatever. And weirdly, that moment sort of touched me more in
Mhm.
some cases than some of the main characters, which feel a little bit tropey. But that I was just like, it's almost like, switch the lights off, last person alive, switch the lights off kind of thing. And it just
Well,
made me feel like, that was, yeah.
what got me about that scene is that the painting slides again,
Mm,
and he looks at it, he acknowledges it, and he doesn't bother to correct it.
yeah.
And it's like his spirit is finally broken. You
Yeah.
know,
What's the point?
oh, there was no point, right?
Yeah.
What was the point of any of this? And I thought it's a great movie that can make me feel like crying at a painting turning on the wall.
Yeah.
Like, to invest that gesture with meaning and significance so that I understand what it means. I could write an essay about, what that means for this character. That's a fine accomplishment.
And there's other moments like that in this film. There's lots of little moments um that in it sometimes in the moment you sort of like, oh, and then you see the ramifications of that moment, or the moment sort of rests with you and you realize what that means. And this film is really good at that.
Yeah,
Um,
I agree. And so, looking at the other characters, you mentioned, Perkins as Holmes and, his wife, and how he's practical and she is doesn't want to have the conversation, right? And in fact, they have a party at their house, and her one rule is you don't talk about this stuff. And at that point, it's not really totally clear everything that's happened,
mm.
like it's still a little ambiguous, but you kind of get the picture. Um, and those kinds of boss general guys, talk about it anyway.
Well,
Um,
it's Olsen. This is where you start to learn about um
mm,
Julian, this Dr. Olsen's
mm,
history, because they acknowledge like, oh, when he gets drunk, he can't shut up, and you got to entertain him or distract him, is what they keep saying. So everyone's sort of
oh,
there to, but he goes off on one about it was a mistake. It was and someone says, "What do you mean it was a mistake?" And he says, "Well, no, no, no. I don't mean that it was someone's fault. It wasn't like done by accident kind of thing. It was a mistake that's happened." But he says, he's clearly, you can see he's dealing with guilt and sort of trauma, because well, you find out that he was actually involved in the program that created the nuclear weapons, and so he sort of like feels responsible for this global death, and so that sort of um keeps playing that. And when she confronts him and says that, shut up, like this party's over, like stop talking kind of thing. She's obviously quite young, and the fact that she has this child, like she wants to
mm,
fantasize that there is this future, that there is this hope. And every time that sort of people talk about this thing, this cloud of nuclear radiation that's coming towards them, like it chips away at her and this hope that she's got. And you see it in the film, like as the film progresses, she becomes like less and less engaged until the very end. She's almost in a sort of um a stupor of her own making kind of thing. But
yeah.
that's
And,
what's so good.
while we're on the status quo for these characters, before he ships out, Perkins is Holmes, her husband says, uh, here's a suicide pill.
Mm,
And she says, what are you talking about? He's like, look, I'm leaving. We have to be practical. Here's what radiation sickness is going to feel like. I don't want you to suffer. And this painful,
oh,
beautiful
it's
conversation.
yeah,
and he knows that she is in denial, right? But he also knows he has to have this conversation. And there's this wonderful line where, she realizes you're talking about killing, Jennifer, our
The baby.
newborn. It's just, you want me to kill Jennifer, and he says, well, she's going to be sick too.
Well,
but
the point he makes, which is even more horrific, because he says not only will she be sick, but if you go first, she'll be alone.
Right. Yeah.
And so he's like, you can't do that.
Even more heartbreaking, she says, "Oh, is this a cure that you're giving me?"
Yeah.
And he says, there's no cure, right? And this is like the status quo for all these characters. All of them fascinating, all of them interesting, all of them, starting to get into sort of gut punch territory.
Yeah.
And then the main drama of the film begins as the sub goes out to follow this theory about the North and San Francisco and San Diego.
I want to highlight, because I do think like the act one does, because this film's long. I mean, this is 2 hours 15, I think, 2 hours 14 minutes. So it's quite a long film for 1959. But this first act, you're right. I love what you've said, that this is a disaster film, because it definitely follows that format, that formula. And this opening works in that it is long, and you kind of got to work through it. But by doing so and connecting with these characters, it provides the gut punch that comes at the end.
Yeah, and I think I hate most disaster movies. I mean, I see them, but I do kind of hate most of them. And it's because they're so formulaic. Right? And I don't know what was the last good disaster movie. I mean, Poseidon Adventure, Towering Inferno. I mean, there haven't been a lot of great disaster movies since the 70s. And part of the problem is, even in the 70s, there's sort of, a lot of tropes, right? Where it's like, oh, here's the young rebellious kid,
They're formulaic. They're designed to be formulaic.
Yeah.
That's the sort of,
And while this is looking at different reactions to grief or different ways of dealing with trauma, it doesn't feel schematic. It feels rooted in character. It feels like an old-time film that's rooted in character, rather than, oh, here's the establishing scene. He cares about his younger brother. I hope they'll both survive. Will they or won't they? I mean, it doesn't feel forced. It feels like you're being introduced to a cast.
Yeah, I think it helps. This is obviously based on a novel, and you get some of that sort of like that literary flow that I think is there, rather than it being formulaic, as a disaster movie is. So I agree, but it's quite a long first act. The second act, I think pretty much all of it is on the submarine. And again, I love this, all close quarters, and it becomes like not so much a quest film, but they go to the North Alaska. They go up to Alaska, and they've got a Geiger counter attached to the submarine, and so they surface, and you hear it and does all its thing, and it's just a very simple conversation where the Towers and Olsen are just sort of conversation, say, well, that's a lot higher. Not only is it higher than we were anticipating, than we expected, it's higher than it should be. Like, it's not, we thought, not only is it not dissipating
what
faster,
we wanted, right?
No, is it not what we wanted? It's worse than we thought.
Right.
Like, it's worse than it should be. It's worse than it should be. We thought it could be better. It's actually a lot worse. We now know there is no escaping.
There's no safe place.
Yeah, this is it.
Right.
Like, there is no hope. So then they continue down the coast.
Well, there's no hope from radiation. right? Like the whole world is irradiated and it's coming to Australia. But maybe some humans have survived, right? Because we've got
Yes.
this signal out of San Diego. So they
But
head down the coast
yes, but first they go to San Francisco.
and they
Uh,
sail under the Golden Gate Bridge, which is a beautiful shot
Yeah.
of the abandoned Golden Gate Bridge as they sail underneath it.
Yeah, I love the fact they had this submarine that's sort of like, gliding under the Golden Gate Bridge, and they have the abandoned Golden Gate Bridge,
Now,
and then an
by the
abandoned
way,
city.
I, this film owes your country a debt because the United States Navy would not let this movie use U.S. submarines, right? For obvious reasons, like it's saying
Yeah.
the U.S. military is going to just obliterate humanity, right? So they got a British submarine that was a
Oh, okay.
non-nuclear submarine. So that's a British submarine.
Cool. There
So
you go.
the Brits were like, "This is a good movie. We'll help you out."
Yeah. Looks good. It is a great shot.
It does.
And then they also get the periscopes up and they look and they see this abandoned city. Now once again, we don't see any bodies.
Mhm.
However, there is an interesting moment in this. So there's a guy on the board on board the submarine, a yeoman, who is from San Francisco, and he asks if he can see. And they say, well, not much to see, but yes, of course, I'm not going to stop him. So he does, and then basically he abandons ship, and you see him swimming to shore. Um, and they try and call him back, and he says, "I can't. I've got to go. I've basically got a date." And he jokes about it, and he swims
I'm gonna
ashore.
see my family.
Yeah,
Yeah,
he's basically what
he
he's saying.
wants. He says I've got a date on so and so Market
Yeah,
Street or something. Yeah.
and there's an interesting conversation where Commander Towers sort of says to Olsen, like, how long have we got before we can take him back? And he says, couple of hours, less if he's eaten anything or drank anything. And beyond that, if you bring him on board, it's a time bomb because he's just bringing on the radiation. So beyond the thing with this film is it's never it almost refuses to be bombastic, in it sort of like there's no like dun 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 kind of moments.
Mm-hmm.
These are all just like pragmatic conversations.
Yeah, very understated.
Yeah.
Yeah, and this whole sequence is very, an amazing sequence, but also remarkable for how understated it
Yes.
is. Just kind of matter of fact, old school masculinity, just
Yeah.
kind of like
It's
very understated.
very macho, but it is. But there's almost like a camaraderie. There's still like this brotherhood to it. There's still this like because he does the yeoman swims aboard and he disappears, but they stick around. And it's I love the fact that they surface right next to him fishing the next day.
I do too.
And they talk to
And they
them.
have a conversation,
Yeah,
right?
and they're
On
like, how
loudspeaker.
how do you feel? What? But
Hmm.
more importantly, he's like, oh, I feel fine. I had a bit of a bad stomach last night. I basically I looted a pharmacy. No, and they're like, oh, he's like, then they ask him, what did you see? What's it like? And he says, I saw bodies, and after the first few, I stopped looking.
Hmm.
And so, unlike we talked about, and just to make a connection, for the Patreon, we talked about the world, the flesh, and the devil. And one of the sort of like points and slight criticisms we made of that is it shows abandoned streets and abandoned things, but there's no bodies. And it's a similar situation where it's been radiation that's killed people off. Again, you don't see the bodies in this, but there's the acknowledgement of it's not good.
Yeah, at least there's verbal description of bodies,
Yeah.
right? I mean, there's one body in like the final shot, but it's cropped and, but you're right. I mean, that is a weakness here, but at least there's dialogue,
Oh, I agree. Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm glad there's the dialogue and his reaction where he's sort of like, yeah, no, I looked and I saw my family and I looked. Kind of wish I didn't, but he knows he
Hmm.
can't go on board. And then he says, like, how long have I got?
Hmm.
And they say, there's no measure. Could be a few days, could be a week. Can we? And they say, can we get you anything? Can we give you anything? And he's kind of like,
And we understand that means to commit suicide.
yes. Basically, they say, we can give you some of these suicide tablets or something.
But again, so understated, right? Like,
Yeah.
can we get you anything, right?
Yeah.
We know what that means.
Yeah.
They don't have to say a suicide bill, right?
No. But then he says, I've got 400 pharmacies. I can find something.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, and also it's worth mentioning there's no talk about disciplinary action.
no.
Like he's disobeyed orders, he's gone AWOL, you know. Obviously like there's esprit de corps. They still care about him. They check in on him. They also want information about the city,
Yeah.
but there's no talk about you disobeyed orders, right? It's just very matter of fact. We know what you've done. You know what you've done. You've condemned yourself, but we still want to offer you a suicide pill. It's really painfully simple and beautiful in its restraint and in the way all of the characters understand exactly what they're doing. You understand exactly what they're doing. Nobody needs to have a tearful goodbye scene and in fact, as they sail off, he says, they say, okay, like mind the propellers,
Yeah.
and it's so beautifully, just a
Mm.
beautifully delivered line.
But I think there's a sort of an unstated but acknowledged relationship going on between these people as well. Because as you've
Mhm,
said, that there's the esprit de corps, like everyone's still doing. We talked about the guy, the waiter that's still sort of correcting the photograph or the picture and still serving people port. Same with the people in the submarine. Okay.
mhm.
The moment that they find out, because they don't really hide it, they're quite open about all this stuff. Like the moment they find out that there's no real hope, and all this other stuff, they've seen San Francisco. It's abandoned. There's nobody there. Discipline never breaks down, but there's no threat from the commander. There's no conversation where they say, "Well, discipline could break down. We could have a real problem," which I think would be a consideration if this was made today, because there's this acknowledgement of like, well, what else are you going to do? Like, you can't discipline any of these people. They can't go, well, you're going in the brig, or you're going to go back to a court martial. But also, they also know that there's no point getting out of line because there's nowhere to go to do anything.
Hmm.
And so it's almost like they just continue to do what they know they need to do. And I love that as well, that everyone just keeps doing the job that they've got to do. Um,
Yeah,
so
and
yeah,
there's a respect for this man's decision.
yes,
Like yes, he abandoned the group, but this was his home,
yeah,
and he wanted to check on his family and die, you know,
with them.
in San Francisco.
And that feeds into the end. We should highlight this.
Yeah,
That feeds into a
he
decision that's made at the end.
he made his choice,
Mm,
and you know, okay, I mean, these are tough choices, but there's a kind of respect
yeah,
that they have given the circumstances.
but also he knows that even if he regrets it, he can't get back on board. Like he can't beg to be but to be taken back because he knows it'd be a danger to others. So he just doesn't. So he knows, like he's made his bed, he's got to lie in it, kind of thing. So it goes both ways. Anyway, so San Francisco is a dust bust. One of the things I said, this is one of the issues that the author had with the film.
Hmm.
In the novel, San Francisco is one of the places that was hit
Right.
and so is destroyed, and the
The
Golden
Golden
Gate
Gate
Bridge.
Bridge is in ruins. Yeah,
Exactly, it's all that kind of stuff. However, as we now live in a post Roland Emmerich world where he, with
yeah.
destroyed every national monument across the world in those things, just from Independence Day and Armageddon, so on and so forth, all those kind of films. I'm kind of glad that this isn't like that, and it is still just like abandoned, but remaining as is, because that feels more impactful than seeing it in ruins. Um,
um, I think it would have been better if it's in ruins. I would have liked to see the Golden Gate Bridge, them sailing under the Golden Gate Bridge in
mm,
ruins, but that could have been, sort of sailing around some debris and, all that kind of thing, and the shock of all of it. I do think that's the better choice here. There are other choices there. I think the film does better than what
yeah,
I understand is the book, having not read it. But there, I would say there is a beauty to the city intact, right? Having
yes,
not been hit directly. Um, I mean, again, if I had my druthers, I would show the city destroyed and I would have bodies everywhere, you know. But, it's 1959. we have to allow for some concessions.
Yes. There's budgetary and special effects constraints, and also say cinematic sort of like rating kind of things as well.
Yeah.
But anyway, they do continue down the coast and they get to San Diego, which has been the source of this Morse code that has been going out. It's been making nonsense, but it's been like whatever. So they send a guy, they get a guy, he's all suited up in his radiation suit and his tanks, and they send him aboard. Sorry, they send him ashore to start looking around. And he first goes in and sees that the hydro power stations are working and all this other stuff. And then he gets to an office where they have tracked this Morse code too. And there's something kind of like I feel exactly how the characters feel, because he walks in and finds that there has been a Coca-Cola bottle has fallen over, and it has attached itself, by accident, just by breeze, has attached itself to a cord on a blind. So as the wind is tugging on all this, it's sort of lifting up the Morse code device, and the weight of the Coca-Cola bottle is then putting it back down again. So it's going da 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 da. And there's no sort of like, again, there's almost like a smirk of, well, of course this is what it is.
Yeah.
And he disconnects it, and he uses the Morse code machine, to send a message back, to telegraph back to the submarine and back to Australia, because again, that's where they heard it. So he sends it out, and you see Towers and Holmes and Olsen on the submarine, and they all sort of look at it and they all laugh to themselves, like, again, of course, like, they can't despair, so they almost have to. It's almost one of the things. If you don't laugh, you're going to cry.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
the shot with the telegraph, I mean, is absolutely brutal.
Yeah.
Know, and so brilliant. I mean, I think as the sailor is walking through, you're thinking, oh, is this where like the mutants are gonna jump out, and chainmail, and it's like, is there a group living underground? Like, what's going on here, right?
Well, you
And
think it
no
could be
one's there.
people, yeah, because the power station is still working, so you're like, oh, they've got power, so there might be people here that are using it, and that's
Mhm.
yeah, it keeps pulling at those, like, keeps giving you that information that says it's not.
Well, and this is cognitive dissonance, right? This is like why I think it's so brilliant is because not only is it correct, right? And in the novel, it's not a Coke bottle, but it is still the blind string. But this is that cognitive dissonance. This is like the way we look for hope. We see what we want to see. We believe what we want to believe, and but this movie is in a rational world, right? It can't show the bodies, whatever, it's constrained by ratings and things like that. But no, it's a rational world, and as much as we might want mutated dog people, to be in that facility, that's a different kind of movie. That's a fun movie. There's nothing wrong with it. But we ultimately know that's a fantasy. And, this is reality. The simplest explanation, Occam's razor, is usually correct. And there's a kind of sad, brutal sort of gut punch to that telegraph.
Yeah.
And a simple explanation. God, it's meaningless.
Yes.
Right? It's the meaninglessness of the universe, right there in the telegraph machine.
But it's yeah, it is gut wrenching, and but it's so well done.
Yeah,
Again,
I agree.
Understated, like you say, it's understated because it is really well done.
Even like the system of blasts from the ship, using the air horn every 15 minutes, you got to come back on the third, it is smartly done.
Yeah, and that's it. I think, but again, I talked about this idea of the last person out the door turn the lights off. He literally turns the lights off on America because you see him depower. He turns off the power station, like he depowers it, and you see this neon light, these neon light tubes sort of going out as they're leaving. And he's like, "Yeah, you've shut down. That's
That may
metaphorically
be the last
that
functioning
me
power station.
yeah, exactly. This is the idea of like, well, you've shut down um America, but that's it. They're going home. That's it. They've got to go back to Melbourne. They've got to sort of the journey is now. There is no hope. There's this thing.
We
No,
had to
but
check it out, right?
yeah, we've done
Of
our
course we
duty.
did. We did our duty, right?
One thing I think
Due
that's in
diligence, right?
yeah, there's one thing in this though that I think now must come later in all of these films. Um, there's no character that loses their cool.
Hmm.
There's no, in Aliens, it's the Bill Paxton character, or there's one that loses their head. Like, we're dead, man. We're all dead. We're all gonna die. Like, yeah, we all know that. Like, there's none of that panic of like the hope is gone. There's no like hysterical despair. They've all just sort of kind of resigned to it and continue to do what it is that needs to happen. Um, but there's this interesting this is where this interesting conversation comes.
Yeah, right. This is the closest we get to losing their cool. Is
Yeah, but
drunken Julian. Every Julian's got to be an alcoholic. I
yeah,
get it.
yeah. Um, but there is. I love this conversation where they are all talking. There's this like all and unified acknowledgement, but they don't even know who started the war.
Mhm,
It just sort of happened. Now, in the book, I did read that the book actually gives
mhm,
a full description of the events that led up to
mhm.
the nuclear exchange. But even so, as a reader, but there's a guy, there's one of them that's like, well, I was in it for a time, and I still don't know what the hell was going on. Like, I'd love to know what caused it. Um,
And you can't imagine that, in chaos
mm,
of a nuclear exchange, especially in '59, not every ship would be updated with,
no,
you know, the correct information in real time. If the correct information, I mean, if it takes 30 minutes to figure out exactly what happened, all the command centers are gone.
yeah. Well, this is the thing. Like you see throughout this is, um, they do sort of like talk about the fact that like oh, we've lost that station, we've lost that station. It's sort of like there's no like we're losing them. It's just, they just don't respond anymore.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, there's this conversation they do turn to Olsen of like, well, what started it? And who's to blame? Who's to blame is the sort of thing. And he jokes and says Albert Einstein. He sort of started the path of to
Yeah.
the nuclear um thingy.
Or more recently, Oppenheimer.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Hmm.
Um, but I like his. He gives these two sort of things where he says, could have been anyone. I think it's him that says it. Like it could have been some kid, and he thinks he saw something on a radar, and has a thousandth of a second to make a decision to protect and launched or whatever.
And it could have
But
been a flock of birds,
yeah,
and a man pushes a button.
yeah, and that's the end. But I also
Right.
like that he has this idea of, but basically he basically then dismantles this idea of the nuclear deterrent and says, the insanity of having a deterrent that will destroy us. Like, the moment this starts is the moment it's over. Which is war games. I mean, this was
Hmm.
up to the 80s. It goes. But even he said it in 59. It's like, yeah, this is this is insane. Like, you know, well, we have to have this power because so and so's got this power and all this other stuff. Like, it's just he
Well,
sees the ridiculousness of it.
let's stop here and kind of unpack that for a second, because obviously mutually assured destruction has worked.
Hmm.
It seems utterly insane, right?
Yeah.
But it has so far been an effective policy, right? Um, if you had asked the average human aware of global events in 1945, they would have said all wars will be nuclear wars.
Mm.
We use the atomic bomb against Japan. Obviously, we have the atomic bomb. We don't want anyone else to get it. But we will use this in every war hereafter. That was expected. You know, why would that not be the case? You develop a weapon, you're going to use that weapon. And so you get like science fiction where it's like, oh yeah, you have wars, you use them. In the Korean War, MacArthur wanted to deploy the atomic bomb and was recalled by Eisenhower. MacArthur had higher approval ratings than Eisenhower did. The public liked MacArthur, who was a celebrity, more than they liked his president. And Eisenhower stripped MacArthur of command. And essentially established the precedent. This is an exceptional thing which will not be used in every war. But there was real debate about it. There was discussion about dropping a bomb during the Vietnam War. Every once in a while, lunatics like Trump still talk about it, and he dropped the mother of all bombs, just to do it in Afghanistan. So, it was not entirely clear that this, mutually assured destruction would function. And then obviously the Soviets get the atomic bomb, at the end of the 40s, 50, and, nuclear proliferation happens and, we're into the mutually assured destruction period in the 50s. So this is relatively recently, right, when this film came out. And we can now look back and say, certainly we all expected there would be nuclear exchanges by now. All of humanity has lived under this terrifying existential threat of not just their death, which we've always lived with, but the death of our species and the death of the planet. Humans might have always believed in the apocalypse, but now we have the means to make it so in a real way.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that this has distorted all of our psyches in ways we have not understood. But the problem with mutually assured destruction, and in 59, it wasn't clear that that worked, right? As long as it has. But of course, the problem is we've had close calls.
Yes.
Some of them have literally been caused by a flock of birds. You and I have looked at this. And the great problem is all you need is one error, one insane person.
I say, one bad player. Yeah.
We have multiple bad players with nuclear weapons now. More want to get them. How do you have a trigger that if it goes off, everyone on the planet dies?
Yeah. I literally, there was a question on a politics podcast I was listening to yesterday, which is, so having watched this and then listened to that, sort of like it really echoed in my head, where it was laid out that said, what if Putin drops a nuclear weapon on Ukraine? Because that's not attacking,
NATO.
It's not a direct attack on the, Germany or the United Kingdom or France or, America or whatever, or Iran or whatever. It's not a direct attack on it, but it's still a demonstration of that capability. Like, how do you respond? Does the world respond to that use? It's not a direct attack. It's, and does that mean that, is that the end of that nuclear deterrent? Because all of a sudden, do you have to respond in kind? In which case, does it then escalate? And the guy that was being that question was like, I don't know. He literally said, I don't know what happens in that instance.
Well,
and that really kind of like threw me, because I was like, all right, yeah, that could be a scenario that we wake up to one day.
Well, I mean, let's be clear about Ukraine. I mean, we should have admitted Ukraine to NATO, long
time
ago.
Yeah.
And, and obviously, the correct answer has to be you unleash the full arsenal on Russia. And, that's the only deterrent to keep Russia from doing that. Having said that, that's madness.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly.
Because, but God, I mean, it's horrifying. And, the other thing is that all the analysis that I've seen suggests that 1 to 3, probably around 3 nuclear weapons of the current type that are used today, that are far more powerful than the bombs of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, would trigger not just an electromagnetic pulse, but a nuclear winter.
Yes.
So, in the event of India and Pakistan, who have a lot of people in those countries who think they can survive a nuclear attack, at least in enough numbers to make it worth doing. In the event of a few bombs going off, you could have global, big
Annihilation.
problems.
Yeah.
Yeah, possibly annihilation. Certainly, the end of a disruption in civilization, unlike we have never seen. Forget COVID.
Yeah.
Stop whining about your fucking vaccine, man. Stop whining about 6% inflation. Okay, the world has seen worse, but also we have always been on the precipice for all of our lifetimes of a lot worse than that.
That's it.
So
yeah, get your big vehicles
it's
and your
terrifying.
gasoline ready. It's all about to happen.
Well, yeah, if you're lucky.
Yes.
Yeah.
No, it's true, and this is it does. I'm not gonna lie, I don't follow the minutes to midnight kind of thing, but when I see this film, and you have Mary's approach where she's like, I don't want to hear it. I just don't want to talk about it. There's a part of me that understands that completely.
Me too.
Where I'm like, yeah, ignorance is bliss. And you say, as you say, there's that respect. There is definitely that respect for some of the sort of the senior people. It's Gregory Peck's character, sort of the resigned dignity that he has of okay, well, this is the way it's got to work. This is the duty that I've got to follow. Is kind of impressive. But they do return to Australia, and they now know the future. And you have this sort of final act. It's leading up to a finale, but you have this final act of people putting their ducks in a row, if you will,
waiting for the radiation
waiting.
to arrive.
They now just know it's just a matter of time, and not a lot of time, that it's coming. And there's these interesting moments, we go to a farm and we see there's a guy there who's sort of they joke about being scared because Olsen brings his car. It's they're not gonna milk for a week now. And he's like, all right, sorry. Who gives a shit? But they're all sort of resigning themselves to the situation in different ways. And I love Olsen has bought this Ferrari and he's been renovating this Ferrari to enter into this race. And they say, he says, oh, is everyone coming along? And there's a couple of things in this I thought were great, where they're like, oh yeah, we'll come if we can, will there be a big crowd? And they say, well, not really, because there's a problem of transport, because gasoline is actually, petrol is short. It's and the people are using horse and buggy, so I kind of I like that's actually part of the film. But also he's like, yeah, but others just don't care. There's no interest. Why would they care about the winner of a race? And so there's just this thing of but so why are you doing it? Yeah. What else am I going to do?
This touches me deeply. I love, first of all, his name is Julian, right?
Yeah.
But I also love this idea of sort of, we do what we do, right?
Yes.
It's things that I say, I think of the Watchmen quote, right? Because we are compelled. And I often tell people, I'd like to have the things that I write be remembered like Shakespeare. And we like to think that preserves us after death, right? But the truth is, the sun's going to consume the earth, and there's all the evidence suggests we're not getting off planet, right?
No.
We're not surviving this. I wish we thought as a species and try to and made rational decisions, but we're a long ways away from that. And that's heartbreaking to me. But, why do we do this? Why do we make a podcast? Why do
Hmm.
we write? Why do we do anything? Because we are compelled, because we want to. Why do I help somebody who's homeless? Because I am compelled. It's not, I may think it's good. I may
Mm.
think that I'm adding to the goodness in the world by helping my students learn to write or whatever. But at the end of the day, they're going to die. I'm going to die. When they die, it's not really going to matter, well, but can you write a college paper?
Yeah.
Like in the long run, I mean, these things don't really matter. We do these things because they matter to us.
Mm.
And, I don't want to jump to the very ending, but, Julian wins the race and he screws this plaque into the front of this Formula One car that he's blown all this money on.
Yeah.
And it's this perfect emblem for this mattered to me. I felt like doing it, right? And
Mm.
I felt like doing it is really the only answer any of us ever have to anything. Right? It's
Yes.
like that's kind of a great answer, right?
Yeah. Yeah. He's honest. He's just like, yeah,
Yeah.
by the end of the film, there is that thing of, well, what's it for? He's like, because I want to do, well, I bought this car because that's exactly what I wanted to do. Why wouldn't I? Um, but I also like the race
Yeah.
because it starts off a bit chaotic and people are doing turns and you see that Olsen gets spins off on several occasions and stuff, and people are like, oh my God, like, is he all right? And then it comes to the final lap. Um, but that's when it becomes Mad Max. Like all of a sudden, like cars is like there's a car set on fire that's still going around the track. People are bouncing off, like people are going off like cliff sides. Cars are tumbling. Like to win it, it's almost
Slamming
like
into each other,
yeah,
flying through the air.
yeah,
Yeah.
it goes crazy, and it's that thing of I'm this sort of I don't know, just not so much a death wish, but like, well, I'm gonna die, so I might as well at least go out doing what I love at full pelt. It's a bit like the opening panels of Dark
Dark
Knight
Knight
Returns,
Returns.
and this is a
I
good
thought of
way.
that too.
This is a good way to die.
It
Sort
would be a
of.
good death.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It feels like that. There's that realization of like, well, if I'm going out, I'm doing this, so fuck it. And again, I sort of respect that, but he does win. Um, and then it's sort of like you have this sort of a high, you have this sort of escalation of this kind of like almost like an action racing scene. Um, and then it sort of brings you down with a real thump because you're then like, oh, the first sign is that Towers gets called by the medic, gets called in by the medic,
Hmm.
and one of the crew has got radiation poisoning.
Yep.
And he just thinks it's been a big, I basically
I
hit the
drank too
tinnies.
much last
I
night.
don't too much. I hit the tinnies too hard last night, and so I'll be fine in a few hours. But the doctor says no. He's got all the symptoms. This is first stages of radiation sickness. All I can do now is make him comfortable until he passes. Nothing else. And so this is that final turn when it's like, oh, it started.
It's starting to happen.
It's
Yeah.
starting to happen. We don't know how long it's going to take. And I love the fact that the doctor has a line because Gregory Peck's character sort of says, "So is this it?" And the doctor says, I don't know. Like I haven't got an estimation for you." He said, "We're not machines. We're not going to line up and just die in a row. Like, it's not. This doesn't work like that." Which kind of makes it worse because there's then the unpredictability of, well, when will I die? Who will I sort of succeed? Who will I see die and all this other stuff? You start to realize that, oh, you're right, it could go in any order. So I might go before someone, I might survive someone, whatever. Um, and all of a sudden you start to see I don't know, the mechanics of preparation for the final demise. And the government have now got stations where they are giving out suicide tablets to families. And they're turning up and registering, and there's like whole families like, oh yes, here's my wife, here's my two children, and okay, here's your portion. And there's this massive line. Um, and in the same sense, you then get, well, it gets to the very end, but then you get like the characters that we know start to make their own piece and do with it. Again, Fred Astaire, Julian Olson. Here's about it. I can't remember exactly the order, but he basically sort of like takes this big sheet. He's in a garage with his car, with his Ferrari. You
Well,
can
it's
say,
literally the same scene where he screws the plaque onto the
yeah,
front, right? I mean, I love this so much, right? That it matters to him. I did this. I know it doesn't matter to anyone else, but
I did it.
hey, I did that.
I still
And
won.
screws it into the front, and then lets the car run in the
He puts
garage.
blocks the door. It's the look on his face because he blocks the door, doesn't he? Sort of makes sure, turns on the engine, revs the engine. You see it start to fill full of the carbon, the exhaust, the carbon dioxide, and there's a smile on his face where he's like, "I did what I wanted to do, and now I'm going out on my terms."
Yeah, and it's very. I mean, I have to say, all of these scenes we're going to describe a bunch of gut punch
Suicides.
scenes.
Yeah.
They're all remarkably understated.
Yes.
In fact, to a modern audience that's used to have everything spelled out, each one of them could be ambiguous as to what's actually happening.
Yes.
They're that, some of that is it's 59 and you're watching a series of deaths, but also, it's that same understated thing we talked about in San Francisco. I mean, Julian's death is understated.
Yes.
But you're right. I mean, okay, so he made his decision.
And then it
Uh,
goes to others. So go on.
well, and you have uh, Anthony Perkins and his wife, right?
Mm.
Who have this beautiful scene together. I will say, of the things that I regret about this film, not showing the destruction of San Francisco, not showing bodies, not being a little more obvious about these death scenes. These are minor complaints.
Yeah.
One of them is they should show that infant.
Yeah.
You never see the child. And I'm sure that's so that you don't imagine the infant dead later, right? Even if you don't show the infant dead, right? If you've shown the infant, you know why it's not crying, right? It just feels different. So the infant's not crying.
No, I wanted to ask about that because because going
This
back
is the
to
problem with the understatedness,
it
right?
is, but I wondered about the reason for this because we talked about it in the opening act. The first act is lining up all these characters,
Mm-hmm.
and they're, as you said, the status quo. Like here's who they are. And we know that this is a young couple. They've just had their first baby, and like you say, she carries around like a baby carry, and you see sort of like you see the bassinet, and you hear the crying, but you never see the baby. And I thought the same thing. I was wondering throughout, going, would that be for audience of 1959? Would that be too much?
Mm-hmm. I think so.
And
I
is
think that's
that the
why it's
reason,
not there.
or was I thinking, or was it like a casting? Or we can't have a baby on. So I don't know, but
I mean,
I
it's
did think
59.
about
You could throw a horse off a cliff, I mean, it
it.
doesn't
Yeah, fair
matter,
point.
You
Okay,
could shoot a dog in the face, if
yeah,
it's for a movie.
all right,
Um,
yeah,
yeah. So I mean, I think it's for the emotional effect.
because it's this scene with the Holmes family
Mhm.
had me enthralled just watching it because you've seen her breaking down throughout the film. Slowly, the Mary Holmes has been breaking down more and more, and she's in this sort of like stupor state by the end. And she's just brushing her hair, and she knows what's going on, but she's trying to push everything out. She's always trying to, she's just denying the reality. She's just trying to completely deny it all the time. And Anthony Perkins' character, sort of Peter, comes in, and again, like, the baby's not crying, no noise, and he's been given these tablets, and he's obviously he's doing the actions, and he gives her the drink and also the stuff, and it's just it's that pragmatism that he's shown throughout. He's like, okay, now's the time, and he had to do it. Because you see at the very start of the film, he's competent. Like he fed his child, like he's given it the bottle and all this other stuff. So you
Mhm.
understand that he's able to do these things, and then to just see them lying on the bed, and he's obviously given her the tablet and is readying
In a
himself. Is
close-up shot.
in a
Yeah,
close-up
and
shot,
it's
and
not,
it's
again, it's so understated, right? Like and I think that adds to its effect. Like I'm
yes.
watching that and I'm like, I mean, like watching Julian's death, I'm like, is he killing himself? Like, oh shit. Like, I mean, you're watching this and it's like, they're talking about, she says, she regrets that she couldn't face reality and they could have, had more honest conversations together, basically. Um, and he says he understands. And she says, like, this is the end, and he just says, yes, very matter of factly. Um, and she cries and they kiss,
Mm.
and at some point in that scene, I'm thinking, oh, they've taken the tablet, like, oh, that's what that was. Like, um, wow, this is
He gave her
really
the
brutal.
yeah. I mean, you get the feeling there's scenes that you don't see, and
Hmm.
it's almost those scenes that you don't see that as you say, when that realization comes when they're lying on the bed, and I'll make a comparison in a moment, but when they're lying on that bed, and you say, that he's stood in the kitchen and he's made a bottle and he's had to sort of stir the tablet in for the baby to take. He's given her a cup of tea or a cup of coffee or whatever it is. He's given her this drink in a cup and saucer. He's had to make those preparations, knowing exactly what it is that's he's doing, and just knowing that is you're like oh shit, like we're coming into the scene now, but he's been, but we also know that he's probably been prepared for this because he's already had that conversation with her early in the film before he left for the mission. But yeah, this is the film. This is the scene where I was sort of like, it's seeing Olsen die is, or his suicide is. It's not heroic. It's not triumphant or anything like that. But it feels kind of like he's doing it on his terms. Do you know what I mean? Like
I think it's kind of triumphant. I
yeah,
mean, but in a melancholy way, right?
yes, yeah, okay. But
Yeah.
like he's won the race. He's done what he's going at on the terms he wanted. That sort of thing. So I'm like, okay, cool. Like I get that
Oh,
thing.
and there was this discussion of you're trying to kill yourself earlier, right? So like we have been prepared for Julian to die, right?
Yes, and other people have as well. So they're all sort of like,
Yes.
I think others are acknowledging, oh, that's clearly what's going to happen. Um, but so it hits more when you see the Holmes family, and the fact that like you never return, like this is it, like you never see them die, you never see them sort of fall asleep or anything like that. It's just that acknowledgement of it. Okay, well that's it. That's your parting shot, or that's your parting moment with this family.
I often wonder as a writer myself, like what makes a scene so affecting.
Mm,
And there are a number of scenes in here that just feel like gut punches, where the weight of the scene is on your shoulders watching it. Um, the guy on the fishing boat in San Francisco watching the sub leave, and the camera holds as the sub goes further away and further away, and you think watching it, you're never going to see them again.
mm,
You're left alone. This is the last time you're ever going to see a human. I mean, you want to cry out, come back,
yeah,
right? And that's meaningless. That's useless. Um, you feel that weight. You find yourself asking these questions, right? Um, you are prompted to do this because the dialogue isn't doing it for you. Um, and then with the Holmes, as they die, this intimate shot and what's not being said, I mean, they're pretty obvious. I mean, she says this is the end. He says yes,
mm,
right? But there's so much love there. And in a film that's restrained and understated, the fact that they clearly have that love and that intimacy that her denial hadn't previously allowed, um, which is what she's apologizing for. The fact that she apologizes for it, right, is so beautiful. That she understands that denial grows a distance between them. Um, all of this is just it's understated, but it also lets those emotional lines feel so affecting because the rest has been so understated. And so to
Yeah.
have this close-up intimate shot between them, which we haven't even had with
Mm.
the main characters and as lovers, um
But
and to think, my God, they're dying, right?
yeah,
This is
but
the end, and this will happen to all of us.
because it acknowledges throughout the film between these two that there's been a distance and there's been a problem because of the situation in the world. And the difficult conversation you had at the beginning about taking the tablets. But there's also a scene that's worth mentioning is that when they go to the beach
Hmm.
at one point in the film, and the Commander Towers, Gregory Peck, has started this sort of flirtation with the Ava Gardner character. Um, and this is when he says his wife's name, and she sort of says, "Oh, I'm fine with that." And they have this sort of like this banter and this flirtation, and he slaps her on the bottom with an oar, and then they wrestle on the sand. Which,
Beautifully done, by the
yeah,
way. Yeah,
it's all very playful. It's really nice. But that's when Mary says to Peter, "Well, why don't you wrestle with me anymore?" And he's like,
yeah.
"Well, I'll wrestle you now if you want." And she's like, "Well, no, that's not the point. Why don't we have that playfulness anymore?" And you can see he's going like, well, because I don't want to, you can see he's not so much he's frustrated, but he's like, well, I'm trying to keep you calm kind of way, and
Yeah.
I don't know where this goes. And so you've seen that there's this distance between them throughout the film. So to have this intimacy and this honesty at the end is really sort of like, you're like, oh, unfortunately, it's taken this for you to reconnect in that sort of that way. Well, you clearly are a well connected couple, and I gotta say, Anthony Perkins is really good in this. Like, he's one of the
Hmm.
sort of like a young guy, still up against like Gregory Peck and stuff. I think he does a great job. But and also
Well,
this is Fred Astaire sort of like serious acting, non-dancing kind of debut as well. So
and he's great.
yeah.
Yeah, all the actors are great. I mean, to get back to this point on the beach, I had forgotten about that, but that was kind of heartbreaking, and
Mm.
the way that it sort of broke my heart is like seeing them play. I mean, you're right about the dynamics of that couple, but I also felt the way in which seeing people having fun when you're dealing with tragedy can feel like a stab, you know.
Mm.
Um, and there is this way in which, everybody living with this terrible, with imminent death, right?
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
um, seeing this couple, in the honeymoon phase, right? Um, only brings back to mind the terrible sadness that
Yeah.
they will deal with, and all of them will deal with. And the way that hangs over everything sort of is brought back to me. It's like you can't even enjoy things anymore because, and this is true sometimes when you're mourning or something, right?
Mm.
When you have a moment where you laugh at a TV show and then it reminds you, wow, so and so's dead, right?
Yeah. Well, we used to
And it
laugh at that
hurts.
together, or that was, or the,
or,
um,
or even just the experience of pleasure,
yes,
right,
you feel guilty for it all.
induces
Yeah.
pain, right? So I thought that was fascinating. I
Mm.
I, I loved
Yeah.
that little.
No.
And as they die, they reminisce about when they met, and they met on the
On the
beach,
beach,
and
which
that's
is
what the title comes from.
yeah. Um, but this kind of leads into well, we should. There's one of the couple. There's obviously the Gregory Peck and Ava Gardner sort of thing, and this comes to the final decision. She's staying behind, and she wants him to stay. They've talked about having this house and sort of seeing it out together. but he's put the vote and the option to his men, the crew to the submarine, to say, do you want to stay or what do we do? And they almost unanimously, I think, from what I understand,
I think they
vote,
unanimously
yeah,
voted
vote to go home
to the United
to the United
States
States,
and
knowing that,
die there.
yeah, to die on their own sort of terms, on their own soil and that sort of thing. And he says, I've got to take them home. That's my duty. That's what I've chosen to do. Like, he would like to stay with her, but that's the choice he makes.
Well, and even before that, there's a brief scene where they lose contact with the last city,
Yes.
and the Gregory Peck character Tower is basically like, well, you have a field commander to admiral, right? Like it
Yeah.
doesn't mean
Yeah.
anything now, right?
Yeah.
But basically, he is now in charge of the United States Navy.
Mm.
And maybe it's because I'm an American, but I mean, like that sort of brings home, like, oh, this ragtag, this one submarine,
Mm.
um, sort of brings home, like, yeah, the radiate, there are all these signs, like the guy getting sick, um, that indicate the radiation is approaching, right?
Yeah.
You feel the countdown, even though there's no clock, right? So yeah, he decides to leave and puts duty ahead of love. I mean, he can't abandon his men in the end. And so we get to almost the final shot of Ava Gardner standing, watching the submarine leave as he stands on the submarine and looks back at her. And this too was heartbreaking.
Yeah.
The last time they'll see each other is the world is ending. God.
It's sort of a little bit cliche, but not. I think it's done well. I like the way it's done. That it feels like um it's not too sort of like schlocky, you know what I mean? It's not overwrought. I look because it's all understated. Like she basically speeds along to the edge of the cliff and just watches as he sort of goes off. But this then does take us into what I would consider to be the final montage. There's a montage of different bits and pieces. We've had this Salvation Army has been playing, and there's a big sign that says "There's still time, brother."
The implication being to convert and get right with the Lord.
Yeah, but
Right.
but it's obviously time is obviously the key word in this because unfortunately, this is where my brain goes. Unfortunately, because it's got the sort of pause in it, there's still time, brother. I kept reading it as Hulk Hogan, sort of like there's still time, brother, and it kind of had a little impact on it. But it's about the time, isn't it? There's still time, and the fact of the matter is there is no time. Time is a waste now. And there were three shots. You get this sort of establishing shot of this marquee, this slight stage, and the playing on. The band plays on, as it were, and there's a big group of people. Then you get the acknowledgement of all the people taking the suicide tablets. You then see the family, the things being handed out. The family's also getting their stuff, and then you see it again, and there's a smaller crowd, and it goes round again, and that's when you see the waiter in the club, um, drinking the port and making that final sort of the final snooker shot, and the lights go out, and he just sort of shakes his head, and that's it. And then the final thing is it goes back to this area. It says there's still time, brother, but there's no one there.
Well, there's kind of like, isn't there a guy like kind of slouched over, cropped on the right?
Sort
And
of. It feels a bit like I think that's supposed to be the preacher. Is what
so
I
I
sort of
think that's
assumed.
my theory is that's the only body shown. But because it's in such extreme close up and cropped, you could easily think he's fallen asleep or whatever, without context.
It's
So
not graphic, is it? It's not done
no.
gratuitous. Yeah, it's again understated.
And so, I feel like that's the one corpse that's shown in the entire movie.
Yeah.
And it's in the final scene, the final shot. And of course, okay, so it's a message shot, right? I mean, it's
Well, this is the
look what we're
one.
doing.
Yeah, this is the one part of um. This is the one part of the film that kind of I feel goes a little bit off approach or off tact, if you will. It's been so understated up until now. that we then get it's almost like a gong of like, zooming in on this. It's it's there's still time, bong, still time, bong, and it keeps zooming in. So I get it, I get it. You're totally telling me,
Yeah,
you've been telling me the same thing for 2 hours 15 minutes. Like, I get it. It's a little bit. It's the one time that it gets a little bit ham-fisted. There's a few other times, but it's the time where I really feel it, where I'm like, oh, if you'd have just lingered on this shot
yeah,
rather than this, you'd have been in tone. I think it'd have been much more effective. Um, but yeah, but then and
I
that's sort
agree.
of.
I mean, I think that I can sort of see it two ways. I agree with you. Um, and I think that it's been such an understated movie, despite being about these big things.
Mm,
And partly understated for budget and censorship reasons, but also just as a literary mode.
mm.
Um, it's clearly both. But so this kind of ruins that understatement to be like,
Hmm.
do you get it? We have a social message.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, no, I got it. you know. Um, but the flip side is you've kind of earned that. Like, it's hard for me to really be that mad because
Yeah, I'm not
it
mad
does
at
hold
it.
too long. But it's I feel like it's been so understated and it's done such a great job that it's like, okay, you want to make sure people get this and it's a good message anyway. So,
Yeah, it just
I'll
it,
forgive it, but I agree with you. It's a misstep.
yes, it's the one thing where I'm really like, oh, okay, but this feels a little bit of a misstep, a poor choice. But that's it. I mean, that's the ending of the film. Is then you get this sort of like abandoned street and a sign that's fallen over, and it just takes you up from there. And I'm kind of left sat there watching and going, oh, like wow, that film has kind of taken the wind out of my sails, and I'm not sure what
Oh, it's
to.
depressing. I mean,
Yeah, no, and
it is.
brilliantly so. Like,
Yeah.
humanity is gone. There's no animals. There's no people. There is nothing. Like, this is we have destroyed ourselves. Um. So yeah, no, it's a fascinating film. One of the things I'm kind of couple of things to note. I think there is it didn't do particularly well.
Hmm.
Um. Which I sort of may have understood as being like people went to see it and were like, "Don't see that. It's depressing as fuck." Like,
Yeah.
um, the reviews were mixed. I think some people actually criticized it for being so understated and not being clear with its message, which actually I think is a massive strength of the film as I
Hmm.
watch it now. At the time, there was a lot of, I even read it on sort of, there were several critics that were like really hammering it for that reason, which sort of suggests they were crap critics, in my opinion, but there you go. Um, so yeah, it's interesting that it didn't do well and it sort of fell by the wayside. And as you said, it's kind of forgotten. Uh, but not in Australia.
Oh, interesting.
Because obviously it
Oh,
focuses on
yeah.
Australia.
It was remade.
It was remade as a
Uh-huh.
three-night miniseries that was clubbed together into a single 3-hour film, directed by um, Russell Mulcahy, who obviously known, well, not obviously known, but directed music videos before he did Hellraiser, Highlander, and The Shadow, 1984 Shadow. But it also stars all these sort of like known Australian actors. I was expecting it to be like, oh, it's a TV film, it's cack, it's all this, it's a bit naff. No, it's kind of highly respected as a TV movie. Again, people are like, yeah, there's budgetary restraints and censorship restraints because it's a TV movie, but it's almost done with such affection and such sincerity, for both the original source material and this film that we've been talking about, that a lot of people like almost put it on par, which is kind of
Mm.
interesting. So yeah,
No, I
it's
wouldn't
an
mind
odd
seeing it.
it's an odd yeah, a little oddity, this film, but this TV movie, it's hard to find. I had a look.
Is it on
It's
YouTube or something?
No, it's not. It's a
Oh,
TV movie. It's kind of difficult to find because it's 3 hours as well. I think it's one of those, so it's not readily available anywhere that I could find. Um, So, but it sounds like it might be worth. I wouldn't mind reading the source novel, to be perfectly honest. It's one of
Mm.
those where I think, okay, this sounds like it could be interesting. So, yeah. Any final thoughts then for On the Beaches or On the Beach?
Um, I think it's very interesting the way this plays with our hopes. One of
Mm,
the things that was changed from the novel is that in the novel, there are other survivors,
mm,
unambiguously, and the human race is not dying out. Montevideo has, an outpost of survivors in the novel. So that's a change that I agree with the film on.
mm.
And I think the whole strength and power of this film is that dawning acceptance, even in the audience, that no, this is really the end. Um, and I think that we are so trained by narrative, especially Hollywood, to expect that Hail Mary pass, right? I mean, as they arrived back in Melbourne, they realized that Julian had discovered unobtainium, which would allow them to
The
drain the radiation from,
the
um,
portals opened and the Avengers arrived and everybody was saved.
that's right. There's a multiverse to
Yeah.
retreat into, um, or there's a plan to go to Antarctica, and somehow survive there. No, but we are trained by our narrative and largely by bad narratives, I would argue, to hold out hope and expect this. And so I think that precisely unlike the novel, the quest of the ship, right? The sort of like Odysseus's quest that
Mm,
that occupies the middle of the film. Um, we are holding out hope ourselves. But even once they get home, they understand it's the end.
yeah.
We are still sort of like, is this really happening? Like, is this really
Well,
going down this path?
as a modern viewer, you are right. We are trained to expect the hero moment, aren't we? Like someone to turn up and save the day. And so you're right. It tickles in the back of my mind throughout the third act that there's gonna be some reveal. Oh, we found there's an underground bunker under Antarctica, and
Mhm.
we can all get there, jump in the submarine, and we're gonna sort of escape or whatever. There's always that sort of a hope, if you will. I've been trained to hope, and this film very understatedly just sort of pats you on the shoulder and says, "I'm sorry, there is no hope.
Yeah, I mean,
Here's
what the
here's
film
a
says
small
is
here's a small box of suicide tablets. Take two and see me in the morning."
no. I mean, what the film says is, you are Mary Holmes.
Yeah. Yes.
Um, and that's brutal, but I think
Mm,
it's honest and right, and I think it illustrates the difference between honest writing and dishonest writing. um you know this is the correct ending, right?
mm, mm.
And yet you can understand the urge for a writer to say, well, there's an underground bunker, maybe I'll leave it ambiguous as to like whether they'll survive, but like
Yeah.
they have a plan, they go underground, maybe the last shot is of the bunker, leaving it ambiguous, did that work or not? I mean, that would still be today considered a really dark, depressing movie, This is a step beyond that, but it's a step beyond that because it is honest.
Mm.
It doesn't feed you the bullshit. Um, it doesn't lie to you.
No.
It's brutal, but it's honest. It's doing what it needs to do for its narrative.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that all movies have to be depressing or all honest narratives, but I mean, you have to be true to your story and true to what the movie wants to be or the book wants to be. And this is a movie that does that and has that courage. And that is incredibly rare. It was incredibly rare in 1959, and it is even more rare today. Um, and so I have such tremendous admiration for that. And anytime I see something that presents uncomfortable truths, or has the courage to follow its narrative through in ways that it knows are not going to please the reader, or the viewer. Um, I have a kind of tremendous admiration for it, even above the fact that those scenes work and are
Yes.
terribly effective.
Yeah. I think it's that true. It's this, as you said, it's that sort of honesty and the fact that it stays true to its sort of um its journey and what it's supposed to be telling us. And it's sort of, but it does it in a way that is understated. It never resorts to sort of like bombastics. It's never sort of what we consider to be modern Hollywood. It's just telling you an honest story. And because I think of the cast and everyone's so well, does incredibly well, and it's sort of like melodrama without being melodramatic overly. That when it does come to the end and you get those sort of like those gut punches, as we said, like they really land. Because if this had been overplayed and there had been some bombast and there'd been those other bits of thin pieces, it would feel more like the comparison I was going to make is Titanic. And one of the scenes, because I kind of like the James Cameron Titanic film, right? It's been a few years since I've seen it, but I remember liking it and being affected by the end. The ship's going down, and you see things like there's the scene of the old couple lying in bed together as the water starts rushing in under the door, and there's similar scenes to that, right? And you think, but that's played like that's dramatic, bombastic, sort of like slapping you in the face with a wet fish of how dreadful is this? Do you know what I mean? This is just
It's
sort
the
of like
typical disaster movie
it is.
stuff, right?
Yes. Yeah, it's
It's
the
here's
big
the couple
disaster.
that died in the Poseidon Adventure, but are now follow our heroes, right?
Yeah. But this sort of like does that. There's no that it's not trying to hit you in the face with the wet fish. It's sort of but it will tap you on the shoulder and just say, just so you know,
Hmm.
um, it's almost like the doctor in the hospital telling you, I'm really sorry to tell you, but the Holmeses have passed. And you're like, oh, you sort of left a little bit speechless by it. And it's on, by the way, Dr. Olson has also sort of took his life, and you're just sort of like you reeling constantly, like what the fuck? So it just keeps telling you these things, but it's doing it honestly. It's brilliant. I was kind of surprised, and as you said, this is 59. Our experience of science fiction in the 50s, if you go back and listen to our 50s block, is UFOs and giant ants,
Hmm.
and so to come to this, I was thoroughly pleasantly surprised. And really enjoyed it. It's kind of sad that this is a forgotten, is a forgotten remnant only really for this um, genre because it does
Hmm.
feel like this film should be remembered more.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a masterpiece.
Mm,
I think it's it's on my short list, not just of science fiction movies, but probably of movies. Period.
mm.
Um, that's saying a lot. Um,
Well, I think we should leave it there because I think otherwise we're sort of sat in maudlin remembrance of this film.
let's,
Um,
let's take a minute to
yeah,
remember the Earth.
yes,
I mean, it does feel that way, right?
yeah,
You said, afterwards you were like, I kind of need a break,
yeah.
and I was the same way. I was like, do I want to hop into, another movie right now? Like, um,
I went and watched some cartoons. I'm not gonna lie. I went some there was I needed something light-hearted to alleviate some of the emotions it pulled from me. Um, but yes. Anyway, yes, let's leave it there. But I do recommend this film. Go seek it out. I got it from the Internet Archive. I'll put a link in down in the notes. Freely available on the website. Where did you watch it?
it's on YouTube too.
Oh, it's on YouTube as well. So yes, available on YouTube as well.
Not that we're endorsing either. If those are violations of copyright, we
I
don't
don't think
know.
no,
We're not.
I don't think so because in the Internet Archive covers off all those kinds of things. Make sure it's a proper website for those kinds of things. So as far as I'm
It's
aware,
been it's had
is it?
takedown notices
Oh,
before.
okay.
Yeah.
I usually think
mean,
it's quite good, but all
they do
right.
have a lot of stuff out of copyright, but
Yeah.
you know.
But yes, but anyway, but we we're not stopping there. We are carrying
No.
on. And really, the next two films are of a piece. We are going to be doing next is 1964's The Last Man on Earth, featuring my boy Vinnie Price, um, doing his version of the I Am Legend story by Richard Matheson. And if you go over to our Twilight Zone, trekking through the Twilight Zone um, on the Patreon, you'll find that we are big fans of Richard Matheson, having done a lot of contributing to the Twilight Zone over the years. Um, and then beyond that, we are going to be doing the 1971 shouty version with Charlton Heston in The Omega Man. I'll also be reading the book, just so we've got that to run parallel. And in addition to that, we couldn't sort of like not do it. And so to finish out the I Am Legend triumvirate, that has been done, we will also be for the Patreon. We will be doing the Will Smith I Am Legend of 2007. So they will be coming soon. So yeah, lots of Last Man on Earth kind of sort of stories to come.
It's amazing how much in looking at like the history of the post-apocalyptic genre, how dominated it is by I Am Legend adaptions early on. There's kind of like a wave of
Yeah.
sort of like Last Few People on Earth, which is kind of covered by The World, the Flesh, and the Devil, which
Hmm.
we just did for the Patreon. But you know, there are a few other movies like that, and they're all kind of in that sort of like B movie range, right?
Yes.
And then there's On the Beach, which is like a masterpiece, hugely influential, you know, but did not do commercially well. And then there's these like it's like, well, I Am Legend does that. It's like it's not really a genre yet. You know, it's kind of got these like little threads in movie cinema and well, in cinema. But you know, there's not a kind of like established genre yet.
It's sort of coalescing, isn't it, in this early
Mm.
area? You can see bits and pieces coming together to form those things that, we will look at as we go. But for now, anyway, we'll finish on that. Yes, we've got some Vincent Price, Charlton Heston coming up for the future. But for now, Julian, thank you very much. It's been a fantastic conversation. I've
Yeah.
really enjoyed this. It's been a good one. This is a good one for the show. This is a big one, I think, for us.
You know, neither of us had seen this before.
No.
And, you know, in doing this podcast, you know, we watch some stuff that, you know, is truly awful, but is beloved or, you know, interesting or whatever. And once in a while we have, you know, great finds for one or both of us.
Yeah.
And this is one of those great finds.
Yes, I agree. This has been a treat. So thank you for that. And ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. As always, as we've been plugging away, go check out the Patreon. So much new stuff on there and other stuff, bits and pieces. Trekking through the Twilight Zone, 30-minute thoughts, other bonus material for the main feed. Go and check it out. And leave us a review as well. We always appreciate reviews. But
Mm-hmm.
for now, thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, and we shall see you on the next episode.
There's something very important I forgot to tell you.
What?
Don't cross the streams.